Eala didn't set out to change the industry. She just wanted to play tennis. But her rise has exposed the gaps, the biases, and the missed opportunities that have defined this sport for decades. American sponsors are reacting, not out of charity, but out of necessity, because the world is watching, and the world is bigger than they thought. What happens next is up to Eala, but one thing is certain: tennis will never.
This changes everything. A Filipino teenager nobody saw coming just flipped the entire tennis world upside down. Major American sponsors had their playbook ready, their predictions mapped out, their next big stars already chosen. Then Eala happened. Now they're scrambling to catch up to something they never bothered to understand. Nobody was talking about Eala in the places where million-dollar decisions get made. Corporate headquarters, marketing strategy sessions, those glossy tennis publications that decide who the next superstars will be. Her name wasn't circulating in any of those circles. She was background noise, a talent recognized by people who follow junior circuits religiously, but completely off the radar for the machinery that determines who gets the spotlight in professional tennis. Manila born and raised. Coming from a nation where basketball rules everything and tennis courts are harder to find than gold, the path Eala had to take was always going to be brutal. You want to know what the Philippines had produced in Grand Slam singles champions before her? Zero. The foundation that American and European players build their careers on simply didn't exist. Elite training academies, corporate backing from middle school age, media coverage that turns teenagers into legends. None of that infrastructure was waiting for her. What she did have was access to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. There she went head-to-head with Europe's rising stars. She had a family that refused to stop believing when everyone else had written her off, and she claimed the 2022 US Open Junior Championship in a way that should have sent shockwaves through the tennis establishment. This wasn't some lucky tournament run. This was dominance, the mental toughness, the complete lack of fear, the way she finished matches when everything was on the line. That should have been everyone's wake-up call. Instead, the tennis business machine kept humming along like nothing had happened. Sponsors threw their money at the same predictable targets. Tall, powerful American prospects with massive social media followings. Eastern European players whose surnames already sounded familiar to tennis fans. The marketing formula hadn't evolved in generations. Find a young, white, preferably blonde, ideally American player and start building her brand before she's won anything significant. Safe, predictable, profitable. Eala's broke every part of that formula. Petite frame, Southeast Asian heritage, representing a market that tennis executives couldn't even locate on a map. The general consensus was that she'd carve out a decent professional career. Maybe sneak into the top 50 ranking, maybe grab a smaller tournament title if everything went perfectly. Respectable for sure, but not someone who could fundamentally change the business landscape. That miscalculation was about to become the most expensive oversight in recent tennis history. While American sponsors were busy looking everywhere except where they should have been looking, something massive was building momentum. Eala matches were generating viewing numbers from the Philippines that competed with their biggest television shows. Her social media engagement was exploding not just in Manila, but spreading like wildfire through Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. An entire region was starting to believe that someone who looked like them, someone who came from where they came from, could actually compete at the absolute highest level of this sport. Then came the match that shattered every assumption they had made. But to understand why that match mattered so much, you need to grasp what was really at stake. This wasn't just about one athlete's breakthrough moment. This was about a billion-dollar industry realizing they had spent decades completely ignoring half the planet. A second-round WTA 500 match that looked completely routine on paper. Eala, ranked somewhere outside the top 100, matched up against a former top 20 player who everyone expected to advance in straight sets. They scheduled it on one of the outer courts. No primetime television slot, no major American broadcast coverage planned. Just another early round match that would be forgotten by the next day. Then everything went sideways. Eala grabbed the first set in a tiebreak that nobody saw coming. Early in the second set, she broke serve, and suddenly this routine match wasn't routine anymore. As she kept fighting off breakpoints, as she started hitting winners that left her opponent looking completely lost, something incredible was happening on the other side of the world. Every bar in Manila was packed with people watching. Viewing parties erupted across the Philippines. The official WTA live stream, which normally attracted maybe a few thousand viewers for early round matches, suddenly had over 200,000 people glued to their screens. The chat was moving so fast you couldn't read it. Tagalog mixed with English, mixed with emoji after emoji, Filipino flags flooding every comment thread. Alas closed it out in 2 sets. The camera found her celebration afterward. Nothing over the top, just a tight fist pump and this look of pure determination. But in that single moment, she transformed from tennis player into something much bigger. She became hope personified. The internet exploded before she'd even left the court. Highlight reels trending on Twitter within the hour, her backhand winners turning into TikTok clips that went completely viral. Filipino celebrities who had never mentioned tennis in their lives were suddenly posting about Eala. The president of the Philippines issued an official statement. This had moved way beyond sports news into national identity territory. Meanwhile, in American offices at the world's most powerful sports marketing companies, people were starting to ask some very uncomfortable questions. Who exactly is this player? Why are Southeast Asian viewing numbers crushing what we see for some top 10 players? How did we completely miss this? The initial panic stayed behind closed doors. A few urgent emails, some phone calls to agents and managers, but something seismic was happening in those corporate boardrooms. Marketing teams were frantically pulling every piece of data they could find. Social media analysts were studying engagement rates from markets they'd never bothered to examine. Brand managers were dusting off demographic reports that had been sitting ignored for years. What they found changed everything. The Philippines alone represents over 100 million potential consumers. Southeast Asia as a complete region brings that number over 600 million. Tennis viewership across that entire area had been climbing steadily for years, but nobody had invested in creating a star who could actually connect with that audience. Until now. One major athletic apparel company, according to sources who requested anonymity, called an emergency meeting within 48 hours. The only item on the agenda was a single question that nobody wanted to answer out loud. How did we miss this completely? Because Eala wasn't just generating attention, she was creating the exact type of attention that drives sales, builds brand loyalty, and opens entirely new markets. The kind of attention Nike built their empire on with Serena Williams. The kind of attention that transformed Naomi Osaka into one of the highest earning athletes on the planet, regardless of gender or sport. And they had let her slip through their fingers. The match was over, but the real competition was just getting started. What came next was about to put Alex Sales at the center of a controversy she never wanted any part of. Industry insiders started reporting within 3 days that at least 3 major brands had contacted Eala's management team. These weren't formal contract offers yet, more like reconnaissance missions. Companies testing the temperature, trying to figure out what kind of situation they were walking into. Nike, who had reportedly evaluated and passed on Eala 2 years earlier, was now circling back for another conversation. Wilson, her current racket sponsor, suddenly wanted to discuss expanding their partnership into new territories. Gatorade started asking questions. Rolex made inquiries. Even luxury brands that typically avoid tennis unless you're ranked in the top 5 were suddenly interested. But this wasn't the smooth recruitment process these brands were used to running. This was pure chaos. Everyone was scrambling, and it showed. Internal communications from one major brand, never officially confirmed, but widely reported across industry publications, revealed exactly what kind of conversations were happening in corporate conference rooms. Marketing departments were being grilled about why they hadn't identified Eala earlier. Data teams were working overtime to project her potential market value across Southeast Asia. Legal departments were restructuring contract frameworks that could move fast when the time came. One email, allegedly from a senior marketing executive, captured the mood perfectly. "We cannot afford to be late on this again." Everyone knew exactly what that meant. Naomi Osaka. When Osaka won the 2018 US Open, she wasn't considered a major sponsorship priority. She had deals, but nothing close to what her talent and marketability actually deserved. It took months for brands to fully understand what they were looking at. A bilingual, biracial superstar who could dominate American markets and Japanese markets simultaneously. By the time they figured it out and started moving aggressively, her price had gone through the roof. The industry had learned that lesson the hard way, and they were absolutely terrified of watching it happen again with Eala. But they ran into an unexpected obstacle. Olay's team wasn't interested in starting a bidding war, at least not immediately. They wanted something deeper than a quick cash grab. They were looking for partnerships that would respect her identity, honor her story, and maintain her connection to the Philippines. They refused to let her become a diversity initiative checkbox. They wanted her to become the face of something authentic and meaningful. That's when things started getting complicated. Because despite all the excitement, despite all the sudden corporate interest, a cynicism was creeping into the conversation. Social media started buzzing with uncomfortable questions. Why is this happening now? Where were these brands when she was winning junior championships? Where were they when she was struggling through qualifying rounds with basically no financial support? The phrase diversity play started appearing everywhere in comment sections. Critics accused sponsors of pure opportunism, of jumping onto a trend without any genuine long-term investment. People pointed out that Eala's sudden visibility only came after she proved she could generate serious revenue. Her worth was being measured in viewership metrics and social media engagement, not in raw talent or future potential. Other voices pushed back against that criticism. This is how business has always operated, they argued. Sponsors invest where they can see returns on that investment. Eala's success created opportunity for everyone. That's not exploitation, that's just basic capitalism working the way it's supposed to work. The debate kept escalating, and while everyone argued about motives and fairness, Eala herself stayed completely silent. But her representatives didn't. What they said next made it crystal clear that this wasn't just about endorsement contracts anymore. This was about power, influence, and who gets to decide how both get distributed. Eala's manager issued a statement that was professionally written but carried an unmistakable message. Alex has always remained focused on her tennis, not on generating publicity. While we're grateful for all the support she's been receiving, we're also very mindful about partnerships that truly align with her values and her community. This isn't about capitalizing on a single moment. This is about building something that can be sustained long term. That statement was a direct challenge to every brand circling around her. It was a clear signal that Eala's team understood exactly what game was being played. They knew sponsors weren't just interested in her as an individual athlete, they were interested in the massive untapped market she represented, and they weren't going to allow her to be exploited in that process. The backlash didn't decrease after that statement. If anything, it got more intense. On one side were fans who felt genuinely protective of Eala. They saw her as representing underrepresented athletes, finally getting the recognition they deserved. They didn't want her story turned into a commodity. They didn't want her reduced to a marketing case study. On the other side were industry professionals arguing that this reaction was completely naive. Sports has always been business, they insisted. It always will be business if Eala's rise ends up opening doors for other Southeast Asian players, if it forces sponsors to finally invest in markets they've been ignoring for decades. Isn't that progress? Isn't that exactly what change looks like? The arguments spilled over into opinion pieces, podcast episodes, and analytical think pieces. Some writers celebrated Eala for staying grounded and authentic. Others criticized her team for being overly cautious, potentially leaving enormous amounts of money sitting on the table. A few accused the entire conversation of being performative theater, claiming everyone was talking about fairness and representation, but nobody was actually working to change the systems that created these problems originally. Then a former top 10 player decided to weigh in publicly. During a podcast interview, she said, "I think it's fantastic that Alex is finally getting this attention, but let's be completely honest here. If she looked different, if she came from a different country, she would have had these major deals years ago. The fact that sponsors are only interested now tells you everything you need to know about this sport." That quote went viral immediately. It was positioned as solidarity with Eala's, but it also reignited the most uncomfortable aspect of the entire conversation. Tennis has always struggled with diversity, and throwing money at one breakthrough player doesn't solve systemic problems. Eala still hadn't made any public comments, but people close to her said privately that she was exhausted by all the noise surrounding her success. She didn't want to be a symbol for anything. She didn't want to become a case study in sports marketing. She just wanted to play tennis at the highest level possible. But the world wasn't going to give her that option. Her success had exposed fundamental problems with how the tennis industry operates, and now everyone involved, sponsors, fans, media, other players, was being forced to choose sides. What nobody was discussing yet was the most important part. The real transformation wasn't happening in corporate boardrooms or social media arguments. It was happening on the ground level, and the scope was much bigger than anyone had realized. While debates about sponsorship ethics dominated online discussions, something quieter but infinitely more significant was taking place. Tennis facilities across the Philippines were reporting record enrollment numbers. Kids who had never held a racket were signing up for lessons. Schools were showing Eala matches during breaks. Her image was appearing on billboards throughout Manila, but the impact wasn't limited to the Philippines. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, all across Southeast Asia, tennis was suddenly visible in ways it had never been before, and sponsors were finally paying serious attention to data they had been ignoring for years. The Asia-Pacific region represents one of the fastest-growing sports markets globally. Badminton and table tennis had always dominated that space, but tennis had been steadily gaining ground for nearly a decade. The problem was that Western brands never invested in developing stars who could genuinely connect with Asian audiences. They operated under the assumption that Asian fans would simply follow whoever was winning tournaments, regardless of background or nationality. They didn't think cultural representation mattered in any meaningful way. Eala's proved that assumption was completely wrong. Comparisons to Naomi Osaka became inevitable. Osaka's impact on Japanese tennis was absolutely seismic. She didn't just inspire young players, she fundamentally transformed how the entire sport was marketed throughout Japan. Sponsors finally understood that visibility creates connection. Seeing someone who looks like you, speaks your language, represents your culture, that builds relationships no advertising budget can replicate. Eala was creating the same phenomenon across Southeast Asia, but the stakes were even higher this time. Unlike Japan, which already had tennis infrastructure and corporate investment in place, Southeast Asia remained largely untapped territory. The potential wasn't just one wealthy country, it was an entire region of over 500 million people. American sponsors were finally understanding what they had been missing. Nike had dominated Asian markets for decades, primarily through basketball and soccer. Tennis had always been an afterthought for them. Now internal market projections suggested that signing Eala could open doors to retail partnerships, regional expansion opportunities, and brand loyalty that would generate returns for decades. Wilson was already seeing concrete results. Sales of Eala's racket model in the Philippines had tripled since her breakthrough match. Her modest apparel line was selling out consistently, and she hadn't even won a WTA title yet. One sports marketing analyst summarized it perfectly. If Eala wins a Grand Slam tournament, she won't just be a tennis star, she'll become a cultural phenomenon, and whichever brand locks her down early will own that entire market for a generation. The financial implications were staggering, but the cultural implications were even more significant. For the first time, Southeast Asian players weren't just hoping for better representation in professional tennis, they were demanding it. Junior players from across the region were speaking up, questioning why they didn't have access to the same development opportunities as European prospects. National federations were pressuring the WTA to schedule more tournaments in Asia. Fans were calling out broadcasters for ignoring matches that didn't feature Western stars. Eala hadn't started this movement, but she had become its most visible symbol. Whether she wanted that responsibility or not, it was hers now. So what comes next? That question is driving every conversation in professional tennis right now, and the answer might reshape the entire sport permanently. Speculation about Eala's future is absolutely relentless. Will she sign a massive endorsement deal? Will she maintain her position and hold out for partnerships that meet her specific terms? Will she become the centerpiece of a global marketing campaign? Or will she choose a quieter path, staying focused on competition rather than commercial opportunities? Her management team has revealed nothing publicly, but sources familiar with the situation say negotiations are actively ongoing. Multiple major brands are involved. The financial offers are significant, but more importantly, some deals reportedly include unprecedented creative control provisions. Several sponsors are apparently willing to let Eala shape advertising campaigns to ensure they authentically reflect her values and her community. That level of athlete input would be completely unprecedented for someone at her career stage. Players don't usually get that kind of leverage until they've won multiple Grand Slams, but Eala represents something much larger than her individual accomplishments, and the brands competing for her signature understand that completely. There's also serious discussion about Eala launching her own foundation dedicated to developing tennis talent throughout Southeast Asia. If that happens, it could shift power dynamics entirely. Instead of waiting for sponsors to invest in the region, she would be building infrastructure herself, creating pathways for the next generation, making sure that kids watching her success don't have to fight the same battles she fought. But enormous risk comes with all of these opportunities. The pressure is absolutely intense now. Every match gets scrutinized by thousands of new fans. Every loss gets analyzed for deeper meaning. The expectation is that she'll keep winning, keep rising, keep justifying all this attention. What happens if she doesn't? If she has a difficult season? If injuries slow her progress? If the hype cycle moves on to someone new? That's the brutal reality of professional sports. Potential doesn't guarantee sustained success, and the same industry celebrating her breakthrough could easily shift focus to the next compelling story. Maybe that's not the most important consideration though. Maybe the point is that Eala's rise has already fundamentally changed important conversations. She's already forced sponsors to completely rethink their global strategies. She's already inspired thousands of young athletes who never believed tennis was accessible to them. And that impact can't be erased by contract negotiations or tournament results. Whether she becomes the next Grand Slam champion or not, whether she signs the most lucrative deal in tennis history or not, Alex Eala has already accomplished something extraordinary. She's made the invisible completely visible. She's made the impossible feel achievable. And in a sport that has ignored entire regions for far too long, that transformation is genuinely revolutionary. So here's what really matters. Is this just the opening chapter of Alex Eala's individual story, or is this the beginning of a fundamental shift that will reshape professional tennis for the next generation?